All right, so we're at Chav Zayin Amud Beis, Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, smack in the middle of the page, where the Gemara says, is quoting from the Mishnah. The words are the first word of the line, Chamisha. So it says, the Mishnah says, Chamisha Shari Harabayis Varba, Al Arba Pinaisav Mitaychai, that there were 5 guards that stood on the 5 entrances of Harabayis, and there was an additional 4 guards that stood at the 4 corners of Harabayis. Where did they stand? At the corners. What does that mean, the corners? Mitaychai, they stood at the inside of the corners. In other words, within the walls of Harabayis, there were 4 guards standing. And then the Mishnah said, Hey al hey shari azara arba al arba pinayse v'bachutz. There was an additional 5 guards that stood at the 5 gateways into the Azara, and there were 4 guards that stood at the 4 corners of the Azara. But these ones stood mibachutz. They stood on the outside of the corners. In other words, they weren't standing within the Azara itself. They stood at the corners, but outside of the walls. And that's the Gemara's first question. Why is it that when it comes to the Harabayis, the guards were set up in a way that they stood inside of the walls? They were guarding the corners of the Harabayis, but standing within the walls. And when it comes to the Azara, they stood on the outside. What's the difference of this setup? Everything here is precise. So the Gemara answers, Amri, like this. This was the logic. Harabayis, when it came to the Harabayis, the Tama, if a guard were to get tired, Uboy Mesav, and he decides, hey, I want to take a rest, Yosef, there's no issue to sit down on Harabayis. Halachically, you could sit down on Harabayis and the guards would have no problem. So Amrina Mitaychai, so where did they place them? Ideally, it was better to stand inside. So that's where they stood. But Azara, the Itama, Uboy Mesav, but when it came to the Azara, they weren't, if they would get tired and they would want to sit, they wouldn't be able to sit. They would be restricted. Why would they be restricted? Because there's a rule, a principle, that you're not allowed to sit down in Azara unless you come from Malchei Beis David, which not every shomer, was from Malchei Beis David. So therefore, Amnina B'Bachutz, they established that they should stand on the outside, so there shouldn't be any issues in that regard. Okay, next. Now the Gemara is going to ask about the amount. We mentioned that there were 5 gateways of the Azara, and each gateway had its own guard. So now the Gemara is going to ask on that statement, regarding the amount. The Hey Sharim Hu Dahavi Ba'Azara, were there really only 5 gateways to the Azara? Or Ramino Zayin Sharim Hu Ba'Azara? It clearly says in the Brisa that there were 7, and the setup is described in the Brisa. Gimel B'Tzafon, Gimel B'Darim V'Echel Mizrach, that there were 3 on the north, 3 on the south, and then there was 1 on the east. Amar Abaya, so Abaya comes and establishes this is what's going on over here. Today Minayu Leitzrechi Shimur. And Rashi says what this means, but the translation is 2 of them did not need to be guarded. Which 2? Rashi says the Beis HaMaiked and the Beis HaNitzutz. These two chambers had their own gate, but these gates didn't need to be guarded because Rashi says they already had their own guards. So it would be redundant to have a new shomer there, and therefore they're not included. When we say 5, we're saying 5 that didn't already have a shomer. Rava has a different answer. Rava says Tanoi. Rava says that this conversation of how many gateways needed to have a guard, Machlekes is not regarding how many gates there were. Machlekes is how many guards there were, because I think the gates themselves, that's a matter of Metzias, how many gates there were. But that Machlekes was how many guards there were. I'm pretty sure. What's the Machlekes? It's actually a 3-way Machlekes. Let's see. Rava Amar Tanai. The Tanya Ein Peichsim Yud Gimel Gizbar and Mizayin Amar Kalin. That there always has to be 13 treasurers and 7 Amar Kalin. Amar Kalin is like a manager. Rabbi Nassan Aimer Ein Peichsim Yud Gimel Gizbar and Keneged Yud Gimel Sharim. Rabbi Nassan says that this is one of the Tanaim that's going to establish his opinion about how many Shemrim there were. That there had to be 13 Gizbarim. 13 Gizbarim Keneged each Shar. And the Rava says, Dal Chamisha Dahara Bais, Pashul Hu Tamanya Dazara. 13 special guards for 13 gateways. Why are there 13? Well, there's Hey for the Harabais that we already spoke about earlier today. What's the additional 8? So according to Rabbi Nassim, there were 8 gateways that required Shemrim. What do we see from this? We see 8, we see 7, we see 5. So that's what Rava's point is. Alma, Ikatana da Amr Tamanya Havu, Ikatana da Amr Shiva Havu, Ikatana da Amr Chamisha Havu. There's 3 shittas here. There's an opinion that says 8, there's an opinion that says 7, and there's an opinion that says 5. Okay, next piece. So now there's a new discussion regarding the clothing of the Kohen, and it's really 2 discussions. It's the discussion about whether a Kohen is allowed to benefit from his clothing. A Kohen is allowed to derive benefit from the Big Day Kahuna, and the second discussion is whether the Big Day Kahuna had an issue of kilayim or not. Let's see. So Big Day Kahuna nitnu. So sorry. It says that the Kohen would not sleep in his clothing, in his holy clothing. He would take them off. So the Gemara's first attempt is to say, from the fact that they weren't allowed to sleep in them, you could infer that if you can't sleep in it, okay, fine, I can't sleep in it, but what if I want to go for a nice walk? What if I want to go for a nice stroll? What if I want to eat lunch in my Big Day Kahuna? Am I allowed to do that? So you could infer that you're allowed to, because you're not allowed to sleep in it, but other stuff you could do. So that's the Gemara's first attempt. I'm not allowed to sleep, but I could go for a stroll in them. What do I see from this? That it was almost like the Kohen had the right to benefit from his B'dei Kahuna. They were hektish in a certain sense, but they were also his. They were his private clothing that he was allowed to derive benefit from. Okay. Now the Gemara pushes this away. The Gemara says, Amri, no. Really, the Kohen is not allowed to go anywhere wearing his B'dei Kahuna. Only avodah he's allowed to do. Only service in the temple he's allowed to do with his B'dei Kahuna. Everything else he has to do with regular clothing, because he doesn't have the right to benefit from it. So why does it say you can't sleep in it specifically? Because really the Mishnah is only telling me that as a sidestep, as an introduction to the main point. The main point is, what was the Kohen supposed to do with the clothing when he went to sleep? What was he supposed to do with it? And the Mishnah is telling us a specific halacha, that when he goes to sleep, he's allowed and he's supposed to put it under his head, almost like a pillow, like a cushion. He should take the clothing that he wears, the B'dei Kahuna, he should put it under his head. So what do we see from here? We see that not necessarily, or really in reality, the Kohen's not allowed to benefit from B'dei Kahuna. It's off limits. There's no right to benefit from it. And the fact that it says you can't sleep in it, that's not specific. That's it's really general. You can't do anything in it. The only reason why it says you can't sleep in it is to tell you the follow-up. What should you do when you sleep? You should put it under your head. Now the Gemara says, wait a second. Put it under your head when you sleep. Isn't that alone a proof that you're allowed to benefit from it? What happens when you sleep? You want to rest your head on something soft. You want to relax your head. You're telling me, take the clothing and place it under my head. That's the biggest proof that I'm supposed to benefit. I'm allowed to benefit from the clothing. So we're back to square one. I could benefit from it. That's the Gemara's next statement. So you see from this alone that the Kohen's allowed to benefit from his clothing. Of where is he putting it? Under his head. So answers the Gemara, no. It's not going under his head. If it was going under his head, then that would be a good proof that you could benefit from it. But really, it's going next to his head. So, because it's going next to his head, at this point in the Gemara, you're not allowed to sleep in the Kohen's not allowed to sleep in B'dei Kahuna. He's not allowed to walk in his B'dei Kahuna. He's not allowed to do anything personal as B'dei Kahuna. And when he goes to sleep, he's not allowed to put it under his head. He has to put it next to his head. Okay, that's what the Gemara holds at this point. Now the Gemara has a side, parenthetically, the Gemara says, brings from Rav Papa a side derivative from this idea of the B'dei Kahuna being next to the Kohen's head. What's the idea? The idea is regarding tefillin. Amar Rav Papa, Shema mina tefillin min hatzad shariyan. When a person goes to sleep, there's a whole discussion if a person's allowed to sleep on top of his tefillin, and he's not, because it's a bizayon, it's a disgrace. What about next to him? So there's a discussion, are we worried that the person is going to roll over in his sleep? And when he rolls over, he's laying on top of his tefillin, which is a disgrace. It's an abomination. It's not a nice thing. So the question is, are we worried about that? And from here we could learn that we're not worried. Just like we're not worried about a kohen rolling over in his sleep and sleeping on his big day kahuna, so too any ordinary person is allowed to sleep next to his tefillin, and we're not worried that he's going to roll over and sleep on his tefillin. We're not worried that he's going to roll over and lay on top of it. Okay, now the Gemara actually goes on a long tangent to try to prove a svara, to try to prove that it must be that the tefillin is, that the big day kahuna is not going under his head. In other words, until now, all we said was that, yes, it says put it under your head when you go to sleep, but it doesn't mean that. It means on the side. But we didn't really say why. What's the reason? Who said that you can't put it under your head and you can't derive benefit? Isn't that what it says? So the Gemara is going to say, in fact, it's very logical that the kohen would have to put it on the side of his head for a separate reason completely. Nothing to do with benefiting. Nothing to do with benefiting from big day kahuna. A completely separate idea. What's the idea? Kilayim. The rule is that you can't wear kilayim. You can't wear woolen linen. And for all practical purposes, the big day kahuna had kilayim in it. And the fact that it had kilayim was not a problem while they were serving in the Beis HaMikdash. It was mutter, because the Eibishter wanted them, God wanted them to wear it. So therefore, it was not a problem with mitzad kilayim. In terms of kilayim, there was no problem of woolen linen. But now that you're not serving in the Beis HaMikdash and you're just going to sleep, kilayim would come to the surface. The issue of kilayim would now be a problem. And who's giving you the right to wear it? It's kilayim. So it must be that the kohen is not allowed to put it under his head, because putting it under your head, at this point, the Gemara assumes that putting something under your head, article of clothing under your head, is considered wearing it, and if it has woolen linen, you're not allowed to put it under your head. Let's see the inside. It must be that it was next to their head. It can't be that it was under their head. Forget about the fact that maybe they could benefit from it. It can't be under their head because it's an issue of kilayim. And now the Gemara tries every way possible to say maybe it's not kilayim. Maybe that's not an issue. I think it tries 2 or 3 different ways. Let's see. The first way, maybe it's not kilayim. You know why it's not kilayim? You know why putting it under your head is not an issue of kilayim? Because because the belt of the kohen gadol, which was made of kilayim, was not the same belt that the kohen hedyet, the ordinary kohen wore. He had his own belt, which the ordinary kohen, is the kohen that we're discussing in this Gemara. And if his belt was different than the belt of the kohen gadol, the kohen gadol's belt everybody agrees, was made out of kilayim. The question is, did the ordinary kohen have the same exact belt of the kohen gadol? And it's a machlekes. And according to the opinions that say they had 2 different types, so then maybe the kohen's was not made out of kilayim, and therefore it was able to go under his head. But says the Gemara, Lamanda Amr Avnei Shel Kohen Hedyet Zehu Avnei Shel Kohen Gadol Ma'ikle Meimar. What are you going to say according to the opinions that hold that the Kohen Hedyet's Avnei replicated the Kohen Gadol's Avnei exactly, without any difference? So therefore, don't try to tell me it was different, because there's an opinion that says it was the same. Now the Gemara is going to say a different attempt to say it's not kilayim. Maybe you're going to say it's not kilayim. You know why it's not kilayim? Because kilayim ba'aliyah lavisha hudaser. Because kilayim is only a problem when it comes to the question. The question basically is what's considered wearing clothing. So if you put clothing on ordinary fashion, that's obviously wearing. What about putting clothing on top of you, like a blanket or like a sheet? That's also a problem. What about putting something under you, a sheet under you, or a towel under you? Is that a problem? So really, on a biblical level, on a dairaisa level, minatayra, there's no problem if something is under you and it's made out of kilayim. So the Gemara here is going to say, if it's under the kohen's head, it's not kilayim, because the kilayim factor is only if it's on top of you or if you're wearing it. The Gemara says that's not either a good suggestion, because kilayim midrabanan will apply here, because the Chachamim came and said, what happens if something's under you and you roll over in the middle of your sleep? Or what happens if something's under you and you I don't know, a wind comes and blows it around you. The point is that because it's fabric has the ability to wrap around you, and therefore, even though it's under you, because it has the ability and potential to wrap around you, the Chacham said we're too worried, and because we're too worried, this kilayim applies there as well. So therefore, we're back to square one, where there would be a problem of kilayim here, and which is what the Gemara was trying to say originally, that it's logical to say that the clothing were next to the Kohen Gadol's head, the Kohen's head, and not under his head. Okay, let's see that inside. When is there kilayim? Only when it's on top of you or when you wear it. When a person puts it under him, shapir dami, it's okay.